Christian secular. That's not the poll.
Right.
The poll is black and white Christians.
You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture.
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward.
For inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up, and then later on the pod, we sit down with Robert P. Jones. Robert's got a new book out titled Backslide, Reclaiming a Faith and a Nation After the Christian Turn Against Democracy. It is an outstanding episode, so stay tuned. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I am well. How are you?
Frustrated again. I know that's a common response.
2, 3, 4 weeks in a row.
I know. That's just general. No.
What about this week?
I know, right? Well, I'm hoping by saying this, recording this on our podcast, that this will mean you have to check this off your honey-do list.
Oh, geez.
But yeah, so I either need an older car or somebody to fix my air conditioning in my car.
What is wrong with the air conditioning? It works fine for me.
Right. Okay, so here's the problem, is that our car is new enough that it's too smart for me, that I know our son,
no comment.
I know, exactly. Our son and I are
the coffee pot is too smart for you.
That is not untrue. That is absolutely true. We'll have to tell that story another time. But for now, yes, like I said, my son and I are on a campaign to get knobs returned to cars.
Yes.
Because the computers and the screens and things are just so hard to figure out. So the problem comes in that my car, when I get in, my car knows that it's me because of my key.
Your key.
And so it automatically presets the air conditioning system to whatever it was, set programmed to.
Right.
Okay. Well, the problem comes when it's the winter time and it's programmed to come on as heat. That's great. But when we are on our 16th day of 110-degree temperatures and I get in the car and it automatically starts just blasting heat when the car comes on, well, the problem with the computer is that you can't just flip it off. You got to push the button and it takes a minute to register what you're doing. And so anyways, so I have to get in the car and experience several seconds of heat before I can override what it's programmed to do.
Well, you will be glad to know, because all this makes sense now, that our oldest son was in from California over the weekend, and he had to take our car out and about. And when he got back, he asked me, he said, "Dad, I was driving around thinking, why is the car so hot?" And while he had taken your key. So he had the heat going at 100-degree temperatures outside.
And the fact that it took him till he was driving around to realize this is very on brand for him.
So because of his request and your request, I will look into it. Yeah.
The funny thing is, I changed it this past winter. I had the same issue, only on the opposite problem. It was 30 degrees outside, and I would get in the car, and the air conditioning would blast. So one day I sat there, I found a YouTube video that told me how to fix it, and I did it by myself. I was so proud. I cannot find the video now, and I cannot find another one that's fixing this problem. So now that you've been publicly shamed for not helping me with this issue,
all right,
maybe it'll get done.
I will try to do something about it next week.
I appreciate it.
Well, Missy, we had one of our very favorite guests on. Robert P. Jones came and joined us on this week's episode. Robbie's got a new book out titled Backslide, Reclaiming a Faith and a Nation After the Christian Turn Against Democracy. And it's just an outstanding book. We've had a long string of really good books lately.
Yeah. So I know you particularly enjoyed this one, as per the number of times you came out of your office to talk to me about it. That's always how I gauge your affection for a book. And this one, you did come out of your office several times.
Well, one of the things that I really do appreciate about Robbie, I mean, there's so much good in the book, but one of the things that I really appreciate about this book, as well as his last book, is his attention to Native American issues. And he does it again here in Backslide, talks about some of the problematic issues pertaining to our understanding as a country and the church, its relationship with Native peoples. In fact, he's even got a chapter titled Cowboys and Indians that we poke fun of during the interview. But he really does a nice job with it. And just, I really appreciate him pointing those issues out and retelling some of those stories that are meaningful to me and reminded me a lot about my growing up and the traditions that were taught to me from my grandparents and great-grandparents.
Yeah, so it's funny. We were talking after the interview concluded, and you had a light bulb moment about your great grandmother
Yeah.
and her sister. And you've told their story, I believe, a number of times, both in public forums and I think on this podcast. But it's just funny to see you realize something new, put two and two together about something else. So I want you to share that.
Yeah, and what the listeners are going to hear in the interview is that the conclusion of our interview, at the conclusion of the book, Robbie offers some really practical ways for us to have meaningful resistance to what's going on in the country right now. And one of those is through voting. And the example he gives is 36% of eligible voters set out the 2024 election. That equated to 89 million potential votes. And Trump only won by 2.2 million votes in the popular vote.
So if my mathing is correct, that's 1 in 3 eligible voters didn't vote in the 2024 election.
Yeah. And so reading that, as well as his emphasis on Native causes within the book, set my mind spiraling. And, I've been doing a lot of extra reading lately, especially about my Indigenous heritage and doing a deep dive into that. And one of the things that came up was the fact that in 1924, that, believe it or not, that is the date when Native peoples were given citizenship here in the United States and then allowed to vote. 1924, that's just a little over 100 years ago. In fact, in 1924, Native peoples were given the right to vote. Did not mean
through citizenship.
Through citizenship. It didn't mean that it was enacted because, of course, states figured out a way to thwart that, similar to the Jim Crow laws.
Because states' rights, Mitch, come on.
Exactly. You're exactly right. And so obviously it took a longer time for everybody to have the right to vote. So anywho, what the light bulb moment that happened is that I have told the story about my great-grandmother and her sister, Eloise and Ruby Boutenot, who were sent to an Indian boarding school here in Oklahoma at Chilocco back in 1919. Here was the light bulb moment for me. They weren't citizens of the United States.
No.
Because they weren't given citizenship until 1924.
So if you can make a case saying that the United States essentially took these children against their will, essentially kidnapped them, and they're not citizens of the United States, doesn't that technically, legally become a whole different classification in terms of a crime? I don't know. I'm talking about.
I have no idea. I'm not a lawyer, but it just really, really began to upset me to think, they had no rights.
No.
And so the federal government could do what they wanted to, and they did. And we see that. And it's just even more upsetting to me now, realizing that fact, that they weren't even citizens.
They didn't even have the protections that any citizen would have.
Yeah.
So, gosh, yeah, that really was kind of an interesting kind of thing to realize.
But then, I've got this picture that I carry around with me in my journal, and it's of my great-grandmother, Mildred Childress. And Mildred was the first woman elected to the Council of Warriors for the Muskogee people. And in 1924, I do have this picture of her, and Mildred is the mother of Eloise and Ruby. And Mildred is sitting at this wooden table in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, with this sheet of paper in front of her and a pencil. And you know what she's doing in 1924? She's registering Native people to vote.
That's incredible.
Me thinking, reading through Robbie's book and all the other extra reading that I'm doing, just about the importance of voting. And we've seen it in this country that the only way for meaningful and purposeful change to happen in this country is when people enact their right to vote and participate in this idea of self-governance. That was the flaw of the founding, that it wasn't for everyone. But since that time, we've done everything we can to include more people in this process of self-governing. That includes women, that includes African Americans, that includes Native Americans, people from Hispanic heritage.
Right.
We've done everything we can to ensure that. And so the big moments in our history are when a group of people are given that right to vote, and they do everything they can to enact that. But then also there is a large group of people, Robbie talks about this in the book as well, who are going to try to thwart that right.
Of course.
And I go back to Paul Weirich's famous statement back in the 1970s when he said it wasn't his goal to get everybody to vote, because conservative policies and politicians don't win when everybody votes.
And when you think about, again, women getting the right to vote, or indigenous people who were given citizenship and thereby able to vote, it wasn't that long ago, like you said. And I just think of your grandmother sitting at that table. I know the exact picture you're talking about. My grandmother also registered folks to vote. And from what I know of our family history, she paid, the poll taxes for African Americans that were required to do that. We have those important moments in our family that have, been passed down to us. And yet, if you went back and told, the indigenous people who were given citizenship and the right to vote, and the women who fought for the right to vote, that 1 in 3 people are going to sit out an election in only 100 years.
Right.
What in the world? That would have blown their minds.
Absolutely.
And it's embarrassing that that's the legacy, that people who literally fought and died for these rights, that's the legacy.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, after talking with Robbie this week and then last week with Sky Perryman, and then hearing your inspiration of trying to find out how to become a poll worker during this election.
I'm still trying, FYI. I had the site open, and when I clicked to fill out the application, it told me it was the page was no longer there, which is the ultimate irony, right?
That is.
But like you mentioned Sky's interview last week, and she told us, we are the guardrails. And it just, in the way she puts that, is very, very poignant and impactful, that, like you said, we have to vote. We, the people, are the guardrails.
Yeah. So, you've inspired me. So I'm going to try to find that page that is elusive to you right now.
If you find it,
and
let me know.
Maybe both of us can be poll workers, because I can't get the picture of Mildred out of my mind. And reading Robbie's book and then our conversation with Sky last week, I've got to be more engaged. And I've been engaged, speaking out, standing up.
We can always do more.
But I can always do more. And so that's my hope. And if you're not registered to vote out there, please register to vote. If you know somebody who's not registered to vote, please encourage them. Take them a voter registration form. Let's get as many people as we can participating in this idea of self-governance.
I agree.
So, Missy, you and I will be right back with Robert P. Jones to talk about his new book, Backslide, Reclaiming a Faith and a Nation After the Christian Turn Against Democracy.
I'm Cliff Vaughn, Senior Media Producer at Good Faith Media. In addition to our in-house original productions, we also produce content with and for other individuals and organizations. If you need help bringing your videos or podcasts to life, get in touch with us at Good Faith Media. We bring decades of experience, an eagerness to collaborate, and the ability to just get it done and not break the bank. Reach out at goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a very special guest returning. Robert P. Jones is the president and founder of the Public Religion Research Institute. He is the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy and the Path to a Shared American Future, as well as White Too Long, The Legacy of White Supremacy in American Christianity. He's also the author of The End of White Christian America. Robert has a new book coming out September the 8th titled Backslide, Reclaiming a Faith and a Nation After the Christian Turn Against Democracy. Robert, Robbie, as we love to call you, welcome back to Good Faith Weekly.
Oh, thanks, Mitch and Missy. Glad to be here.
So, Robbie, last time we spoke with you, we were talking to you about the fact that Pete Hegseth had just banned your book, White Too Long, from the U.S. Naval Academy. So
Oh,
I
right.
have
Yeah,
to,
good times.
right? So I have to ask you, is this book an attempt to get back into the library at the U.S. Naval Academy? And if so, what do you think your chances are?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me just give a shout out to the badass librarians at the Naval Academy who have quietly put all the books that were banned
Excellent.
back on the shelves.
Excellent.
So I'm very happy to report that I have photo evidence that the book is back on the shelf there. And, there were, I think if I remember correctly, there were 8 religion books
Mhm.
in that batch of like 300 books. That were banned, and it was Eddie Glaude and Anthea Butler and raft of others, but they were all books that dealt with race and the kind of mix of white supremacy and race and history in this country. So I don't know. I'm hoping they're reserving a little spot for it right next to the replacement there.
If not, we'll do a covert mission.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
We'll
Yeah.
sneak in and slide it in on the
Absolutely.
shelves, right? So, okay, before we get into the book too far, I want to start out by talking about 2 words, one of which is the title, which is Backslide, and then the other one is Apostasy, which is the title of a chapter. And I don't know that everybody quite understands, who didn't grow up or doesn't understand the culture we grew up in, that to be accused of being a backsliding Christian or to be an apostate is like, I told Mitch earlier, I'm going to equate it to a very problematic joke, but do you remember the movie Sandlot?
Yeah.
Okay, so remember that scene when they're on the baseball field and the boys are kind of like lobbing insults back and forth, or they're arguing about something, and one of them says, "Oh yeah, you throw like a girl." And they all collectively just, again, I understand that's problematic,
Right,
but
right.
in that moment, that was universal. Everybody understood the gravity of that accusation. And so when I look at these 2 words within your book, that's kind of what I think of for a certain subset of individuals, that is those terms and those terms being attributed to you are pretty serious. So I wonder if you could start out by talking about those 2 words in particular. Why is it important for us to understand the gravity of those when we're approaching your book?
Yeah. No, it's great. I'm glad to start there. I mean, it's the title of the book, very intentionally, and I apologize for any PTSD with the word
I
backslide.
got twitchy. I'm not gonna
I
lie.
also, before you launch into this, I did not realize, I mean, Missy and I grew up Southern Baptist, but man, you really grew up Southern Baptist. I mean, you had the T-shirt and the card
Oh,
and
yeah.
everything.
It is something. I joke some, that passage where Paul in the New Testament is giving his Jewish credentials, and he's like, I was circumcised. I was, he kind of goes up. I feel like I could kind of rattle off the
No
Southern
doubt.
Baptist.
I had no idea about that about you, but yeah, there it is in the book.
I don't need to know that about you, Robbie.
Yeah. It was an analogy, but So for me too, I mean, the word backslide. I mean, I immediately, and for many people who grew up in this world, will probably get thrown back into youth group land, right? Is because I think as a teenager, as an adolescent, is where this terror reigned, and it was the idea that you were falling away from the faith, right? That maybe. Now I was Baptist, so supposedly we believed that once you were saved, you were always saved, right? You couldn't lose your salvation.
Right.
But there was always this question of whether or not you really meant it, when you first became saved. So it didn't really help that much to say, because, well, maybe if I'm living this way and I've made these mistakes, it means that I didn't really mean it. And I'm not really, there's all this kind of adolescent fretting that it came back to me when I was writing the book as well. But it turns out I kind of did some digging. It actually has a much longer pedigree than I thought. I mean, it goes back to the 16th century when John Knox used this term against his fellow Protestants who had caved and reverted back to Catholicism when the Protestants were being persecuted in England. So he used this term, and then the King James Bible picks it up. and uses it actually in the book of Jeremiah, where they're talking about the nation of Israel and on the many kind of, faithful, unfaithful. And there's a kind of thing there where they talk about the nation of Israel backsliding and moving away from God and God's plan for them. But that's the idea, right? Is that you're sliding away, like literally sliding away from the right path. And then the terror, of course, is that there's always this callback. But at some point, there is this word apostasy, which is the scarier one, which means you maybe fallen so far back that you might not be able to find your way home, right? You might just be so lost that you can't get back. And that word apostasy is Greek. It literally just means falling away from a previous place, but with a very serious way that, you might not even be able to find your way back.
Right. Well, the book, again, congratulations on the book. The book, you focus in on several sections: intention, examination, formation, confession, transformation, and redemption. And you share a very personal story about your family Bible in the chapter on formation, which was just really outstanding. We have been talking over multiple episodes now about kind of the problematic relationship that the church has had with the Bible. And so can you briefly retell the story about that family Bible and how it impacted your relationship with the Bible?
Yeah. Well, before we do that, I should just say one thing about the apostasy and backslide. So where I land with these words, just how I use them, is I try to be as straightforward as I can. And I basically just say, my take on where we are is that we are living in a democratically backslidden nation, abetted by an apostate white Christianity. So that's how I use the words.
Yeah.
Find a way to throw in lukewarm in there, and I'm going to have a full on
crisis
trauma response.
Right. Spit you from my mouth. Yes. I've been there. So the Bible. This will be an audio podcast. But in the room I'm sitting, on the shelf behind me, is my family Bible. Right. And this Bible was printed in 1815. It was passed down on my mother's side, generation to generation. I am the sixth generation to hold it in my hands. So it's the most kind of precious. There's nothing in my family that's older than that, right? It's the thing that has been taken care of and handed down. And so it's obviously this object of great value about our identity, about our religion, our faith, all of that. And it was the Bible that was carried from Virginia, where my family was prior to 1815, down to Georgia, where we were among many folks in the early 1800s, many white folks who were getting free land from the government as indigenous people were being pushed off, Cherokee and others being pushed off the land by force and shipped off to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears. And so that our family came down. We received 200 acres of free land from that debacle. And that land stayed in my family until my mother's generation, right? She sold off the last. I still have a family cemetery with multiple generations of my family, going back to some of the owners of that Bible, still there in Twiggs County, Georgia, outside of Macon, which is again where we've been. And so, but I try to take seriously is that, what do I do then with a Bible and a faith and a Christianity that was so important to multiple generations of my family, but who were living this life where they were enslaving other people. They took land from indigenous people in the first place without compensation. Then they enslaved African Americans to work the land. By the way, I found the estate settlement right for that, one of those early generations. And I think this is the thing that really prompted me to write the chapter was that estate settlement. My ancestor's name was Pleasant Moon. And so the estate says, the goods and chattels of Pleasant Moon deceased, right on the top of the form. And when you look down, it lists everything. Like, so it's got one table, 6 chairs, 1 feather bed. And then it lists 4 human beings right there, with a dollar amount out beside them. Like, a woman named Naomi, Sarah at $700, out the side, and then goes on to more farm implements. So it's just like listed them among the property. And so I think it's those two documents together, right? Kind of realizing that window on my family's history and this Bible that's been handed down to me, and just realizing that complex legacy, that it, if you're white and Christian, and your family's been in this country for, anywhere near that amount of time, this is your history, right? And very few of us know it. And realizing, this is something we really do have to reckon with if we're going to live in any kind of faithful way in the present.
And it's a reminder that the Bible, tells a story, not only your personal story, but also the narrative within the pages that have been interpreted and handed down through millennia. And one of the things that we've been talking about here, Robbie, has been this very tense relationship that the church, and especially American Christians, have had with the Bible. And the Bible has almost been used as a prop, whether it is a family Bible on the coffee table or the president holding it in front of St. John's Episcopal Church,
Right.
as you describe in the book. So, what should we be thinking about the Bible? Because it does seem to be as though this complicated relationship that we have with the Bible today is one of, I really want to characterize it as an unhealthy respect for it, because it's almost an idolization of it. And it's not even almost, it is an idolization of it.
Yeah, I think it's an idolization of it. And if you further interrogate the it part, it's an idolization of a very culturally restricted understanding of it as well. Right. Because I think one of the striking things that, for example, I look at some data in the book, and, white evangelicals and African-American Protestants read the Bible at very high rates. Both groups do. And yet I guarantee I could go ahead and tell you in the next presidential election, pretty much with 90% certainty, how religious groups are going to line up. Because they line up almost exactly the same way in every presidential election. And on either poll are white evangelicals all the way on the one side, most supportive of President Trump, and African-American Protestants on the other side, most opposing President Trump. So it's not like Christian secular. That's not the poll.
Right.
The poll is black and white Christians. And so if you take that, then you're like, okay, so what does that really mean then if both of these groups are reading the Bible at very high rates? They're going to church at very high rates, and they come out with these entirely different perspectives on how the world should look and what kind of a country we should live in. It tells you something about the way the text has really been captured here. And so I think that's part of what I'm looking at. And I think I grew up with this kind of hopeful mythology about the Bible that somehow it had a power of its own, really. Kind of very high view of the Bible that if you prayed enough and you read it enough, it would convict you, right? Like it would keep you between the lines. It would put up some guardrails. And I think as a more mature adult, I no longer believe that, right? Because we just have too much evidence to the contrary. Just to take my own family's Bible, that they read that Bible, I think quite seriously. And yet, so no contradiction between enslaving other people or taking indigenous people's land. It had no impact on their view of that world. And so what I say at the end is like, look, we kind of have to remember that it's actually at the end of the day, we've got to figure out a way to read the Bible in a way that's faithful to what we think the best of Christianity is. The Bible's not going to do that for us. I think is kind of where I come out. And again, I've got all kinds of evidence. I only have a few charts in this book, unlike some of my previous books. But one of the ones that I have is a chart that shows the impact of Bible reading among white Christians. And it is astounding that essentially, if you're white and you read the Bible a lot, you are more likely to support Donald Trump. You are more likely to deny the existence of systemic racism. You're more likely to kind of hold racially resentful views. You're more likely to be a Christian nationalist, and you're more likely to support the construction of internment camps on U.S. soil for immigrants. The more you read the Bible, if you're white, that's the direction it takes you. So that tells you how the culture, I think, of white supremacy and evangelicalism has so distorted things that's once you put it through the filter of evangelicalism, that's what you end up thinking the Bible really says.
Yeah.
That is a super interesting point that you make. And before I get to my next question, just want to have comment. You mentioned earlier about you wanted to believe that the Bible, in the Bible's power, but also you just gave a firm example of the Bible's power in how it can impact groups of people. And what I think is kind of just sinking in for me is we've kind of leaned on the assurance that the people who are white Christian nationalists, I use, air quotes on the Christian, they haven't actually read the Bible. But what you're telling us is that's not true. That there's this subset of people they are reading, and this is what they're
that whole myth of like,
it.
the worst of these people are the dangerous ones, are people who are Christian in name only and don't go to church, don't read the Bible, aren't discipled, aren't formed. The data tells a very different story. In fact, the more likely you are to go to church, the more likely you are to support the MAGA movement if you're white. So
that's just a very chilling way to say that. And so yeah, I'm gonna have to marinate on that a little bit, but we got to get on with the rest of the conversation. So I know on social media this week, Mitch posted somewhat in jest that he was a little nervous about the chapter.
Hang on, let me sharpen my tomahawk.
Cowboys and Indians. So I just want to say what was funny is my first response to that chapter was to go hunting online for the Sears Big Western Town play set.
Did you find it?
I did, and I will have you know, it's
got to be on eBay somewhere, right?
There are several on eBay. I had not seen it before, and so I went looking at it, and just being able to look at that while you described it just added another layer. So, folks, when you go read the book, have a picture of that up. It will really add to your experience. But let's somewhat nervously, I'm going to ask you this, as again.
It was such a funny analogy, an example that he gave in the book. But here's what really brought back so many memories for me as an indigenous kid growing up in eastern Oklahoma. Even when we played Cowboys and Indians, I wanted to be the cowboy because of the way the narrative was portrayed. And I mean, so when you wrote that, I resonated with that even as an indigenous kid. So
wow.
The disconnect, that you grew up with. Well, let's talk a little bit about that and America's relationship with its indigenous population, what we can glean from it, from the doctrine of Christian discovery to Columbus Day. What can we learn? I think Mitch just gave us a really good lesson, but what do we need to be taking from this history?
Well, I think, it's that we've just barely begun to reckon with it. I was struck, I talk about, in the book, I talk about, Trump, when Trump took the oath of office for his second term, he moved it indoors, right? Supposedly because it was cold. I'm pretty sure it's because he just didn't want to have to compare his crowds to Obama's again. But nevertheless, took it indoors, did it in the Capitol Rotunda. And when the cameras picked up, there's 8 massive paintings around the Capitol Rotunda. They're all like 8 by 12, big 8 by 12 feet, big paintings. And there's some that you would expect, the signing of the Declaration of Independence and George Washington, at the Revolutionary War. And so there's some depicting the early days of the country. But then there are 4 others that got put up in the 19th century. And it struck me that, the way it was positioned, Trump was actually looking at the 4 that were put up in the 19th century, and they're all essentially doctrine of discovery, Christian nationalist paintings. So they're like the baptism of Pocahontas into Christianity, the discovery of Mississippi, the Mississippi River by Hernando de Soto. That's the one I kind of focus on because it really is the most vivid, but that literally has, people, de Soto's forces, European forces pushing cannon and weapons into this indigenous village. And the indigenous people are shown kind of in a teepee, and they're kind of cowering, and their weapons are on the ground while the Europeans are holding their weapons. But what's often missed in the painting is in the far right-hand corner, there's a priest and a soldier standing up a 20-foot crucifix and planting it in the ground in the middle of this indigenous village, right? And it is literally enacting the doctrine of discovery, the claiming of that land for the Christian kings and queens of Europe. And that's hanging in our U.S. Capitol Rotunda as part of our story, right? In a non-ironic way. I mean, it's just there, as you know. And so this idea of the doctrine of discovery, this claim that these lands were designated to be a promised land, a divinely ordained promised land for European Christians, like that myth, is very much still with us today, and it is the vision that the MAGA movement and Trump are explicitly resurrecting today.
Robbie, I really appreciated not only this chapter, but you do bring up indigenous populations throughout North America quite often in the book. And, as a Muskogee Creek citizen, I really, really appreciated that. And, you and I were up in Syracuse, New York, a couple of years ago, and we had the chance to interview you up there as we were talking about the doctrine of Christian discovery. And ever since that, I've been doing a deep dive into this, and I'm becoming more and more conflicted about some of these rituals that we celebrate. We just celebrated the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, which the document in itself uses the word savages to describe Native peoples.
Yeah, merciless
savages. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so, but then also, and this is where I think you do such a great job in the book. You talk about these problems, but you also talk about the ideals that were created when the United States of America was founded. And it's almost this tension between orthodoxy and orthopraxy. And, we forget that this country is more of an idea than it is a thing. And what Native Americans and African Americans are really trying to strive for is to practice what those words actually said. And what the purpose of those words. And as a Muskogee Creek, I still have problems with a lot of the things that, we celebrate in this country, and it's probably how we celebrate them. But as I continue to dive in and discover more of my indigenous self and my heritage, I also am appreciating a lot of what I read from the founders and what this country has the possibility of producing. I think you do a great job in the book by doing that.
Well, thanks. No, I've with you, I feel very conflicted about, I talk about in the book, I talk about Columbus Day. I talk about the national anthem, all these kind of rituals that and the 4th of July and Juneteenth. And I'm with you. I think there's like danger, but there's also promise, right, in remaking some of these. In ways that would be more fitting, I think, for the kind of country we are. I love what you said about, we're more of an idea there. There's a quote that's often misused about America being a nation with the soul of a church, and it doesn't mean what you think it means.
Right.
What was meant by that quote was that it is about professing a certain set of beliefs. Because they meant a Protestant church where you kind of become a member by expressing a certain set of beliefs. And I think that's like both our strength and the danger, right? Because those set of beliefs are contested. And so it's always this struggle. And I do think this, I'm pretty convinced that we are at a particular hinge point in American history where we are facing in parliamentary procedure, when you get you're done with debating, somebody calls for the question, right? And under Robert's Rules of Order, and somebody has to second it. And if somebody calls for the question, it gets seconded, and that is the end of debate. And then it's time to make a decision. And I feel like we're at a moment like that where it's coming to a decision point. What kind of a country are we going to be in? And the visions are pretty clear. On the one side, it's okay. Yes, we're going to declare that we are a Christian nation, right? And that God has, made this a promised land for European Christians. That's who we are. Or we're going to declare it to be a pluralistic democracy where everybody stands on equal footing, regardless of belief or race or any of that. And that's the idea, right? That it's the democracy part of it that holds us together, not a kind of and we're hearing more and more from the MAGA world. You'll hear terms like heritage Americans, right? And that means something like, oh, well, you were here multiple generations before now. I'm thinking the indigenous population is going to win ultimately on that criteria. I don't think they've quite thought that through.
Yeah, right.
but, but nonetheless, but this idea, right, that which is very ironic for anyone who has European descent to claim that they're the original Americans is sort of nonsensical on its face, but they're doing it anyway, mostly to kind of differentiate themselves from the new, more brown-skinned immigrants that they want to differentiate themselves from. But I think that's the fight that we've got in front of us, and it's as sharp as I've ever seen it in my lifetime. I mean, you may be old enough to admit. I mean, I was old. I remember the 200th anniversary of the country, the bicentennial. I was a kid, at the time,
I don't.
but I remember it. But there were contested things going on there, but there was nothing like this, like real rift, I think, in who the country is and is going to be, and the question being called in such a clear way.
Yeah. When Oklahoma celebrated its 75th anniversary, I was a child in elementary school in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And the story of how Oklahoma became a state. And when they did, they had this fake wedding in Guthrie, which was the first capital here in Oklahoma, between Oklahoma Territory and Indian Territory. Well, in my elementary school, they decided to replicate that wedding. And guess who got to be instead of Mrs. Indian Territory, it became Mr. Indian Territory. So I literally, hand to God, Robbie, they dressed me up. I wore my native regalia, and I married this blonde-haired, blue-eyed little third grader right there in front of all 300 of my schoolmates and teachers and parents in the gymnasium of Walter Reed Elementary School. So,
if you had told me that story last time we were together, it would be in the book.
Oh, man. You missed an opportunity.
I did.
You got to write that up, Mitch, if you haven't. I don't know if you ever have or not, but you should.
It's crazy. So.
Which, forget the problem of it. That's what every 9-year-old boy wants to do in elementary school, right? Is get married in front of all your friends. Goodness.
Exactly. So,
wow.
So another delineation of this book is that it's more theological than some of your previous books, which I really appreciated. You are seminary trained. In fact, you and I overlapped at Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth for a year. And one of the things you write about is in the confection section of the book is you take on a lot of the sacred cows and practices of the church. And I can't remember, there was a moment in the book, I can't remember if it was in this section or not, Robbie, but when I read this, I actually had to wipe away a tear. And you were talking about raising your kids. And you make mention that one of your great fears was that if your kids were ever baptized in these evangelical waters, that they may never come out. And that just hit me like a ton of bricks. And it really spoke to me. So why is it so important for those of us who have grown up in evangelical circles, those of us who are continuing to be practicing Christians or Jesus followers? Why is it important for us to continually question our faith and continuing to look at our faith with a critical eye?
Well, I mean, the most simple thing is, I think that keeps coming back to me. I mean, as someone who grew up in the Southern Baptist world, and this is what I can't quite fathom. If you take your tradition seriously, as I do, and you grow up in a tradition that has been so damn wrong so many damn times, why would you not have more humility about declaring what a biblical worldview looks like and what the Bible says and what God wants? And you would think it would chasten you. And I think that's what I am hoping. I'm operating out of some sense of chastened faith, right? Of kind of being so confident when I'm a white, straight male. I mean, this world was built for me, this white evangelical world. And I grew up with all kinds of confidence, and I could debate with the best of them and had chapter and verse, and I could still cite the verses and, but man, there was no humility there. There was no sense of how often we'd gotten it wrong and how deeply we'd gotten it wrong. I mean, I think that's the thing. So I think that's the first thing, is that realizing the great amount of harm that kind of faith has done to the country. And I had this moment where I was kind of realizing that, oh, you know what? Like particularly white Christians have always been the demographic. Now we're no longer the demographic majority, but for most of the country's life, we were an unquestioned demographic majority in the country, which means that at any point along the way, if most white Christians had said, oh, wait, maybe enslaving people based on the color of their skin is not the way of Jesus. Oh, wait, maybe committing genocide and forcibly displacing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of indigenous people from their lands might not look like the calling of Jesus. Jim Crow, like, name it, right? The things that, and we could have stopped that at any point in time. And I think with this book, I'm trying to say, like, and, there are still enough of us, even though we're not a super majority the way we were even 50 years ago, but there are still enough of us that if we could find our way to be more faithful, we could play a huge role in setting the country on a better path instead of dragging it down into the abyss of authoritarianism.
And there's a really important point you make in the book when you write about the attempt to normalize the phrase, this is not who we are, or this is not Christian. The reality is it is, because it has been.
Yeah.
And that we need to be honest about that. And I thought that was an excellent point you made in the book.
Well, this is where I think the sociologist wins over the theologian, here. I think the theologians are always wanting to say, rightly, they're wanting to take a normative stand and say, oh, that thing over there, yeah, that's not Christian.
Right.
Right. Even though the people who are doing it call themselves Christian. This thing over here that looks more pristine is Christianity. And there's a kind of normative way that I think theology operates that way. But the sociologist wants to say, well, what Christians do in the world is what Christianity is, at least in this world, right? And that's what really matters, is what Christianity is in this world. And so, and again, I just think about the Bible that my family had and the world I grew up in. I want to take I don't want to say that my ancestors just thought they were Christian. Like they were Christian. They were sincere Christians. They were sincerely practicing, earnest Christians, and like deeply sinfully wrong all at the same time.
Yep.
Right. And I think that taking that in is much better than trying to sort of draw some weird ahistorical lines and say all those people weren't Christian. I think it's better to say, no, they can be Christian and be that complicit in evil all at the same time. And that's the moral of the story and the cautionary tale for us.
And with those same lenses, we can also interpret the founding of this country that way. When we look at Jefferson, when we look at Washington, when we look at Madison, all these slaveholders, we can say, yes, they believed in this idea of freedom for all, equality for all, even though they didn't practice it. And so they can hold that idea while at the same time being flawed and, and still being, as you said, a sinner. Along with it. And it's just a complicated reality that I think we need to come to grips with. It doesn't have to be either or, it's both and. So
yeah. And it doesn't let Christianity off the hook. I think that's really important.
Right. Absolutely.
Important for me.
Well, I think the key word you guys both use there is the and, not a but or however, but it's an and. And looking at that, again, Mitch and I spend a lot of time talking about that. This isn't who we are, trope, but in realizing, no, this is who we are. And until we reckon with that, nothing is going to get better. And when we need to face those things. So Robbie, a story that was really impactful to me, I wonder if you would share a little bit about, was about our national anthem and how that came to be and kind of the thing that nobody wants to talk about in it.
Yeah. Well, like many things, you start digging in and things get complicated very fast. First of all, it's worth remembering, it wasn't penned, our thing we call our national anthem, our official national anthem, wasn't penned until 1814, right? So it doesn't come along. The founders aren't sitting around with their pewter, beer steins and singing the Star Spangled Banner. It's Francis Scott Key. It's the War of 1814, and it's worth noting Francis Scott Key, by the way, who I played in a third grade play with some satin knickers on, if I remember correctly.
We would have been quite the pair back then.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But he's a devout Episcopalian. from Maryland, but he's also a staunch believer in slavery. Right. And so he actually has what I think people forget. Yeah, I'm just like looking it up there so I could read it here. But there's a stanza that nobody sings in the in the national anthem, and it reads like this: "No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave, and the star-spangled banner and triumph doth wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave." Now that reference to the hiring and slave is a reference to enslaved people who went over to fight for the British, right? And that's he's saying, like, I'm wishing death and destruction to them, right? No refuge could save the hiring and the slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. He's celebrating, their deaths. There, and it was that stanza was very popular with the United Daughters of the Confederacy, for example, who would belt that one out here. But that's part of the legacy that we've got going here. I mean, it's a really odd choice, frankly, for a national anthem.
Well, again, it's just one of those things. I don't know that I had ever read that, and the sad thing is if I had ever seen it, the fact that it didn't automatically jump out and cement itself in my brain is also a testament to a lot of
I mean, the language is a little coded. You have to kind of wait. What does that? Yeah. What does that mean?
What does that really mean?
And if you don't know the historical context, it just kind of floats by. Yeah.
Right.
And the fact all these patriots are singing it to the tune of a British drinking song, it cracks me up too. So,
yeah. Oh, I should say that the abolitionists movement did cue in on this. And they actually, I found this when I didn't know this until I was researching for the book. But in 1844, the abolitionist movement decided to replace that stanza, and they put this: "No refuge is found on our unhallowed ground, for the wretched in slavery's manacles bound, while our star-spangled banner in vain boasts to wave, o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave." Right, that was the abolitionist riff to replace that. That stanza.
And I'd love to talk to you more about the phrase, going back to Dr. Lewis, the phrase that you used after she points out this bridge between Juneteenth and the 4th of July. You talk about a season of critical patriotism. We can't talk about it. We're running out of time. But folks, go get the book. Read it. It's fantastic. You'll want to make certain that you check out that section. So this is not all doom and gloom. You're not always pointing out the things that we're doing wrong. You end with redemption, but in a very unique way, in a way where you challenge us, Robbie, to embrace division. In fact, this is what you write: "We can't and we shouldn't build bridges with authoritarians and Christian nationalists who are actively working to dismantle democracy in their quest for a new glorious ethno-religious homeland. We can't hide behind ham-fisted applications of principles of political nonpartisanship or Christian propriety. We must call them out, and we must insist on this truth, that their attacks on democratic rights, racial equality, and civil liberties, not our defense of them, are the root cause of this conflict." So why is our embrace of division so important for bringing about redemption at this moment?
Well, I'll give a shout out to a good friend of mine, and I know person you know well, Jamar Tisby, who's got this catchphrase, justice takes sides. And I remember kind of thinking about that, and then I think this is a message particularly to white Christians, because I do think that white Christians have decided that Christianity is just comfortable, like it's a kind of cultural thing. It's respectable, and so without saying it out loud, I do think that we have often elevated civility, propriety, politeness over above love and justice. That those are the cardinal virtues somehow. And because it's comfortable, right? You don't rock the boat, you don't kind of stick your neck out. And certainly African-American Christianity has never been able to live that way. And I think we're discovering that real Christianity, even for the comfortable white Christian church, is not going to be able to live that way in this moment. So I think I'm kind of calling out to remember that, we have commitments to love and to justice that are higher callings than propriety And there are some people that, yes, we want to persuade, want to debate, but at the end of the day, I mean, Frederick Douglass was clear about this. James Baldwin was clear about this. Vine Deloria was clear about this. At the end of the day, there are some people you simply have to resist, right? And if they're really undermining the integrity of Christianity and dismantling democracy before our eyes, we can't sort of sit around and just say, oh, well, we're polarized, I guess. Oh, well, we just disagree. I mean, we actually are going to have to take some actions to kind of protect both of those things that if we actually care about them.
Yeah. And you actually talk about a couple of actions. Again, don't have time to get into them, but you talk about voter resistance and religious resistance. That concludes the book. It is fabulous. Again, folks, you're going to want to pick it up. You're going to want to read it because it's just outstanding. So yeah, thank you so much.
So Robbie, I started the interview by mentioning your last visit on the podcast. I'm going to end with that too, because you had a line in there that kind of made me pause and think. You said that the state of our democracy, over a year ago was at a 5-alarm fire stage. So tell me, what stage are we, what alarm are we at now? I would like to ask, is this fire under control? But I think I know the answer. And part of me wants to go back and tell those 3 people a year and a half ago, like, oh, you have no idea. So give us your assessment now.
Yeah. It's hard to see, right, when things happen little by little. But I do think we're in deep trouble here. And I think that's one of the things I cite in the book. And in fact, I mean, where I spent a long time thinking about it, I do actually compare where we are to 1930s Germany. Mm-hmm. And I actually end a chapter by saying we are at a decision point. And what I wanted to say, you mentioned my kids earlier, I dedicate the book to my kids. Mm-hmm. And I did that because I was trying to think about what do I want them to be able to say that their parents did in this moment, right? When they're talking to their kids and they're thinking back to like this time, right? Where the country is really under direct frontal assault. And I think the integrity of Christianity is under direct frontal assault. What did we do and what did we not do? And what story do I want them to be able to tell about that? I think that's the kind of place we're at. And I do end this chapter by saying, like, this is our 1933. It is our decision point. And what we decide not to do is as important as what we decide, to do in this moment.
Robert Jones, the book is Backslide, Reclaiming a Faith and a Nation After the Christian Turn Against Democracy. Robbie, it's always a joy to have you. Congratulations on the book. But before we let you go, we've got one last question. You've already answered it 3 times, but here's a 4th. And I'm going to turn it over to Missy.
Let me say it's a joy to have you, but I also look forward to a day when we don't have to have you back on here. So
yeah,
maybe he can write about something,
That's right. Something happy. Okay, so Robbie, as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So, in light of your work and our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
Yeah, I think I'm going to come back to a kind of calling or a theological point here, because I do think with backslide, apostasy, those words we started the conversation with, what kept coming back to me is that those words at their best are not just words of condemnation, but they're actually an invitation, right? They're an invitation back to a path. Mm-hmm. They're an invitation back to faithfulness. And a couple of times in the book, I say, so this will be it, that there is always time until there isn't.
And there you go. It is time to act. No doubt about that. Again, the book is titled Backslide, Reclaiming a Faith and a Nation After the Christian Turn Against Democracy. It's going to be out September 8th, but you can go to wherever you order your books and pre-order it today. Make sure you do so. Robbie, it's always a joy. Thank you, my friend, for joining us this week.
Thanks so much.
And to our listeners, we want to thank you for joining us this week. And Missy and I will be back next week. And until then, keep living good faith. You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.